Okay, folks. Um, I tried to do a couple videos. One, the volume was off, and then the other one, my dog was barking really loud, and it kind of went in a direction that I kind of didn't want to go. But I really just want to say that we're 2 years and counting for Sebastian Wayne Drake Rogers being missing, and I just got done watching the mother Katie Prophet interview, and I kind of really want to talk about this case without really accusatorial, one opinion one way or another. And I kind of just wanted to really look at it from two different perspectives. With Katie, with the perspective of, doing that, not doing that many interviews. Um, I really want to look at it like the question that people keep asking is, hey, if they didn't do it, they wouldn't be acting this way. Well, my thought was that maybe the question we should be asking is, if they didn't do it, how would they be acting? If we didn't know, if we don't know, say like hypothetically that they didn't do it and they're acting a certain way because of the pressure of the media and the criticism, to where they could be so nervous that they're so afraid to say anything, because if they say, hey, we miss him too much, then people say, well, that's guilty. If they say we're not missing him, if they don't say we miss him enough, that's guilty. If they don't look enough, that's guilty. If they look too much, that's guilty. So, it could be one of those things where they're second guessing themselves. For me personally, I'm a pretty nervous, paranoid, and I have anxiety. So like I could see myself being in a situation to where, and I was in a situation one time where I was basically interrogated, and it was at work, and it was over. Well, I was a janitor at the VA hospital, and I went through and I called Ward Rover and I took all the trash and stuff up, and then there was, I guess there was some rugs, DR UGs found, and it was turned out to be one of the residents there. But I was brought into like this little police department they had, and they weren't even really real police, and they interrogated me, and I was nervous, and just because I didn't really know what was going on, I was on a probation period, and anything I did, I got in trouble. I could have got fired, and I was really nervous. And I remember I had to call home to get the address. I just moved in the home residence. I still where I live now, but at that time I just moved there, and I couldn't even remember my own address. And then I had to call my ex-wife, and she was asleep. She worked day turns, and I worked like the afternoon shift. And I just looked nervous, and I knew they were like. And then I look at them, and I could tell like they think I had something. I'm acting, I'm acting nervous, and then I'm like, man, but it all cleared itself up. The resident, I think, yeah, he admitted to it, and but like I've been in those situations to where like you just get nervous and you act guilty, and then when everybody's kind of criticizing everything you answer, in any way you answer it or anything you do, it's the wrong thing. So how do we really know? My question is, how do we really know what's the right thing? You know, I know that, like, in comparison, they've done and said things that people that were guilty have done. The rambunctious comment where the West boy, the West boys, the two young men that were, the parents were convicted of. The Tisha Stout, where they didn't show their face in the interview, they showed their hands. There was like the laugh with Susan Smith that people compared Katie to. The missing comment, with like Scott Peterson said very early on, and Chris said that he was missing, but we could probably go on the other side of it and look at a lot of things that they said that innocent people said as well. So I just really wanted to break this down and look at it from, both perspectives. Um, there are some things, that they did that were, people said they're guilty, and we all kind of know what those are. But my thing is, we don't really know what they aren't doing, if that makes sense, because we're not there to watch them all the time. If, let's just say, Seth's really good and really comfortable about going out and driving around and running down tips. Katie might be good at a cell phone, a laptop, making phone calls, making contacts, getting the word out, looking things up. Some people are just good at different things. You could do something 100 times that you're bad at, and then maybe do something you're really good at a few times and be more effective than doing the things 100 times that you're bad at. Now, I don't know what happened. I have my opinions of things and the way things went, but you got to ask yourself, like, the family, the Proudfoots and Seth are divided. How did that get to where it got? That's a question that you can ask yourself too. Is it because, you know from the Prophets' perspective, they really were upset at Seth. They really were upset that they made an agreement to not do the GoFundMe, and they really, thought that they looked at Seth like he would grift, as people say, and that really upset them. And then they look at the perspective that Seth got a lot of people, accusing them. Now, Seth's perspective could be, well, I tried to talk to him. I told him I'd do the GoFundMe. I changed my mind. I did it. And then he could look at it like, well, hey, I tried to get a hold of him every time because this is what he said. Every time I got a hold of him, I can't get a hold of him. Seth just recently did an interview and said he's never been alone and talked to Katie ever since this happened. So I think from his perspective is he thinks like them not talking to him, they have something to hide. And they could be looking at it to the perspective where, hey, why does he keep blaming us? You know, um, and he knows us. He should know that we would never do anything like this. And I know they felt like he's dragged up the past, and he's probably felt like they've done the same to him. There's no playbook on this. People do things in dire situations or dire and stressful situations. You're not going to act your best. Put somebody in a pressure cooker and see how they act. If they're not familiar with those circumstances. These things are things I think you have to consider. You got to evaluate. It's easy to just say, hey, I wouldn't act this way. I would act this way. But if you're truly not in their situation, you really don't know. So, let's just step back and say and go over what we really know. If the thing that I think that we do know is Sebastian is missing. And he's, we don't even know exactly what day he went missing. It was either 25th or 26th of February 2024. Besides that, what do we really know? We don't really know about the scent. We've heard we've heard different versions. We don't even know if he had shoes or didn't have shoes. The family saying he wouldn't have had shoes. The sheriff saying we're not so sure that he did or didn't leave with shoes on. Neighbors just said he's ran off before. The family said he's never ran off before. The lights. They've never said what those lights are that showed up in the back. And people are saying, well, if they didn't say what they are, then they have to be this. Well, maybe not. That's really all we know. I mean, what has broken that's been really confirmed since he's went missing? I guess you could say the lights, but it's not 100%. No one's really said what it is or isn't. I mean, they're they're saying that that's not even the right time. You know, I've heard trash truck, then I've heard no trash truck, then I've heard we don't know what they are. It could play into it. We don't know what we don't know. So then, yeah, it's not really cleared up. Is that just cop talk for the fact that they're trying to keep it close to the vest and it wasn't supposed to get out? Yes, absolutely. But at the end of the day, I have opinions of what happened or most likely happened. But I wasn't there. I don't know. I could guess. My true crime brain wants to figure this out and goes through scenarios of what possibly could have happened. And I could even put them at a percent. I could say, hey, this would be 90%. This would be maybe 50% that this happened or this happened. I can't put anything as I can never, me personally, can never put anything at 0%. I could really never put anything at 100%. Even if there's arrest made in this, or they find him and they figure out that, hey, most likely he just walked off. So, you know, and then you got to look too. Like, people ask, well, do you think this will get solved? Well, it could get solved and not really get solved. They could find him and still not figure out what happened to him. Think about that. Um, so, but the thing is, like now at this time, I said it's 100 times. I think it really wouldn't hurt to do an organized search. Now, I don't know, what the money situation is with the sheriff's department, and with Craddock, the sheriff. Craddock could be in a financial situation where they don't have the money or the funds and the manpower to go forward on this case. He's not the be all, main all. He's got a boss to answer to. He could possibly be in a situation where, like, he's not getting help above him and he can't say anything because he might get fired. He could actually be between a rock and a hard place, and he can't tell the family that. You know, um, so you know, and to and tomorrow this could get solved. They could figure out what happened. They could find Sebastian, and this could get solved. And then, I think everything probably will be forgiven. I remember, covering uh, the Idaho 4, and there was all kinds of people accused. Everybody's accused for that. Everybody within around it or come in contact, and then we figured out who did it. And then now people are saying, "Oh, maybe he didn't do it." Same thing with Idaho or Delphi. It took 5 years. They missed something from the beginning. They put something in wrong. They come back to it later. Then they figured it out. That could be something very well with this. With Sebastian Rogers, it could be something that they missed in the beginning. Somebody comes in that's new to the case and just looks at it, from their, doesn't get influenced by what everybody else has told them and just looks at it. Yeah, maybe bring somebody in that is not familiar with the case at all, but has experience and just say, hey, look at this, and no, has doesn't have any perceived, judgment, and is blocked, doesn't, blocked out the noise, or doesn't know anything about the outside noise, and everybody's saying, hey, it's got to be this, it's got to be that. Most people when you talk to about this case kind of have their own, spin on it, like, hey, well, this happened, but hey, the family, they done this, or this happened and Seth did this, you know so I really don't want to, me personally, don't want to accuse anything of anybody unless I absolutely know, that they did it. Because what if they did? You're accusing the prophets. What if they didn't do it? You can't get that back. You couldn't. Yeah, you could apologize to them, and hell, they might forgive you. But still, you gotta live with that. You know, I it's a heck of a feeling to blame somebody and then figure out later, like, you know they didn't they didn't do it. I remember just here recently, I had a jar full of change. It was like $100, and I thought it went missing. But I cleaned my house and I moved stuff around and I put it behind something and didn't see it. And I searched for hours. And then and then I started thinking, like, this is going. Then I started to panic and I thought, like, did somebody come in my house and I didn't know it and take it? So I called my cousin and we talked about it. And he kind of calmed me down. He was like, well, if somebody took that, there would be, if somebody come to your house, they probably, you would know it, maybe not at the time, but later. He's like, if somebody come in and rob something, it'd be all, they probably would have made a mess. You would have saw where they come in. And he was like, this is probably an inside job. And then I went through and I started thinking of, like, everybody that was in my house. And I remember I had this guy fix my toilet, and he come up and fix his toilet. He brought his girlfriend. And I got thinking, I'm like, man, that was kind of weird. And then I was like, and then I got thinking, like, you know, why did he bring her? He could have fixed it himself. And then we got talking, and we're like, well, sounds like he came in, and he's like, did he come in before? I'm like, yeah. And then I got thinking, I was like, it had to be him. He come in by himself. He saw that change, and then he brought in his girlfriend as a distraction, and then they grabbed it on the way out. And I was like convinced that's what it was. And then I went back later, and I looked again. I moved some stuff around, and then I found a jar of change. And I got thinking. I mean, I didn't, you know, call the guy and accuse him or turn him in, but just thinking, like, man, I thought that it was this person, and I felt horrible. I felt bad. And that's just over, like, some accusing somebody of taking some change. I think it was $100. Well, it probably would have been 100. I took it to Walmart, and I think it was like 80 some dollars, and they take like 10%. So it probably was. It was just it was a big jar, and it was a glass jar, and I put all my change in there. Whoop! What happened, bud? Oh, my remote. Get down, buddy. Oh, my cat knocked over my remote. Um, but yeah, I mean, so I'm just using that, as an example, and I'm glad that happened to me because it really, opened my eyes up, to the perspective. Now, I'm not saying, like, hey, you shouldn't have one opinion one way or the other, but maybe keep it to yourself, But I get it, man. People are, emotions are high. People are, they're wanting this solved, and they just had a protest, in front of the police department, and I think tensions got a little high there. There was a situation with the police supposedly, making a comment, and Seth, was kind of saying, hey, if you represent Craddock, you're in the wrong or whatever. And I think one of the police, it looked like to me, that may have flipped Seth off, and that's not a good look. Um, but this case, I'm telling you, man, is really, I don't know what it does, but it really aggravates you, and you're kind of either on one side or the other. It really is hard to stay in the middle. And then people get mad at you for staying in the middle. So, and that's kind of what I'm doing here. But I just kind of wanted to really maybe look at it from a different, perspective. Um, I hope that one day we will, well, find Sebastian, and hopefully he's all right. Um, I've heard theories where like maybe the family's got him hid and he'll return when he's 18. And if that's the case, and he was put into place and it did help him out, and he's still alive, that would be a good ending. You know, I don't know. I mean, anything is possible. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. But prayers goes for me. Pray for the family. Prayers go to the family. Um, hopefully, this gets resolved sooner than later. And I'll leave it at that. And I'm going to end it there.